First of all, Joe, the biggest lesson that you have learned over your career, the number one thing?
Oh, be honest. Be honest. Speak the truth. And, you know, when I had forced reflection period after I lost the treasurership, and after about a year, various intermittent points, I reflected on, what I did well, what I didn't do well, and normally in politics everyone tells you what you do badly. But, you know, the one thing I never ever did was lie or cover up in 20 years of elected office, never once. Politics is very hard. So what social media has done is it's made the voice of the critic much louder than the voice of the advocate. And the mainstream media has reacted to the Twitter feed. It was very different when I went in and very, and government would initiate policy. It'd come up with an idea and say, look, let's have a debate about tax or something. Now, government is all reactive. Yeah. It just reacts to whatever the latest crisis is. Exactly. And that's a bad way to govern.
Look, I totally agree with Joe. I mean, it's an ugly business, and Joe's absolutely spot on. Too many politicians react to the 24-hour media cycle.
Integrity in politics. John Barilaro, and I think Paul alluded to that a little bit earlier. In my opinion, sometimes, and actually more often than not, people who have been in politics, people who have served their nation in that field, are often the best qualified to go overseas and do these kind of jobs. So how do we ensure that people who are the best qualified can continue to do the roles? Both of you were in politics and went into overseas roles appointed by the government. How can we ensure that the process is potentially more transparent so that the public can have faith that they are the best candidate and not have really good talent miss out on good jobs?
When you're overseas, and Joe is a good example of this, Kim Beazley was a good example of this, if you are a senior politician, one of the things you can do is you can walk into a room and talk to everybody. Now, we may not have spoken to everyone here tonight, but I bet Joe and I tried to, because that's what you learn. And you learn not to be afraid to walk in a room. If you can't walk into a business room, and Americans are like this in particular, if you can't walk into a business room and compete with Americans, then you shouldn't be there. This will sound wrong, but a public servant rarely can do that. And therefore, you send your best people.
My appointment was criticised at the time to the United States. If I hadn't have been Treasurer and Chair of the G20, might have been a different way to cope with President of the United States berating you and abusing you and screaming at you, but I wasn't prepared to back down. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, I was Treasurer of Australia. I got the mandate of my people. No, you know, you pick the best person for the job as far as I'm concerned. And whatever you say about Barilaro issue, the bottom line is, was he the best person to do that job? Had the chutzpah in New York. You've got to have chutzpah in New York. Otherwise, you drift off into irrelevance. So I'd rather have big personality in New York, no matter who that is, rather than have a wilting flower.
Scott Morrison and the events of the past week, what are your thoughts?
Oh, it was bizarre. It was just wrong. Sorry. He's a Prime Minister. We've got a Westminster system. It was sneaky. I don't know what the motivation was other than hubris. And, you know, he should apologise to the Australian people for not being transparent. I can't remember when it had something like that, like a swearing in of a minister, and you don't tell the Australian people about it. To say it was in a crisis and unprecedented, I mean, Churchill didn't do that during World War II, when his country was being bombed. You can have multiple ministers in a portfolio. You've got senior ministers, junior ministers. But, you know, he really let down everyone in his cabinet. And I'm sorry, Erin, I had powers as Treasurer of Australia that only I could exercise, like Foreign Investment Review Board. It was my discretion, solely my discretion, to reject GrainCorp, ADM's bid for GrainCorp and others, right? That's why you have a minister. That's why you have the powers given to you by the Parliament, not by the Prime Minister, by the Parliament. And frankly, it's just unforgivable, it's unfathomable, It's a complete breach of trust with the ministers. You know, they're there to serve. They're there to represent. They're given a job. They're sworn into that job. Their obligation is to the Queen, whether you like it or not. She's the head of state. That's what we swear allegiance. And I just, it's hubris out of control.
You seem really angry by this.
I am angry.
Yeah, and Karen Andrews has expressed a very similar sentiment.
No, I think a lot of people have, either publicly or privately.
You do have that power when you're the leader, and you can exert it over any portfolio if you want to. But having said that, the other important thing is what Joe said. You cannot run everything when you're Prime Minister. Government is so complicated and so much detail. You've got to delegate and have faith that the Treasurer is going to make the right decision and support the Treasurer when he makes that decision. And if you don't have confidence in him, you shouldn't have appointed him or her in the first place. And if you don't have confidence afterwards, you sack them. That's the way Westminster works.
Even if war doesn't hit our region, it has a massive impact everywhere, clearly. How can businesses insulate themselves?
Well, firstly, you've got to diversify your supply chain, you know, and I think everyone's learning that at the moment. And, you know, you diversify your supply chain, you also diversify your markets. You know, you remember Kevin Rudd, right, when he said everything's China and go to China and so on and so forth? Well, that didn't end so well for some people. But China's very important. I mean, I think it's the most remarkable story of lifting people out of poverty in the last 1,000 years. China, amazing story, right? And great credit. But you got to have diverse sources of income. You've got to have diverse sources of supply, and you've got to have a board or advisors that just understand how it plays out.
Do you believe that the US needs to change its position on Taiwan?
Look, a long time ago, everyone, United States, Australia, said one China policy. It's really hard to come back from that position. And I understand the sensitivities, I understand the difficulties. What I'd like to do, and this is one of the problems I think, Joe, with Biden, he doesn't send any strong messages at all to me. And we really need someone in the White House, and I don't think that's Trump, but we need someone smart in the White House who can actually start engaging with the Chinese in a way that makes sense. The big trouble if America doesn't engage a lot more with China is you're going to end up with a real change in the body politic. You've got to weaken Russia, and the Ukrainians put up a bigger fight thanks to Western technology than anyone thought they would. They've given the Russians a big bloody nose and they've suffered a lot. That's weakened their economy. So where does Putin go? He goes to China.
Correct.
So you end up with totalitarian regimes hand in hand, two very powerful ones. And the real trouble is, where's the leaders of the liberal democracies that we all believe in? You know, the American president, in my view, is weak. We've just lost the British president, Prime Minister. He was all over the bloody place anyway. Angela Merkel is gone. She was the one person that I thought was strong enough to do something. Whether the French guy is up to it, I don't know. So where's the leader of liberal democracy in the world? So the totalitarian states are going to end up like that. If China takes advantage of Russia, and as I said before, they're very strategic and very smart, I think we've got a real change in the world. You end up with two different blocks. And where do we fit in and all that? You can't let that happen.
You make a really good point. A weakened Russia means a much stronger China.
That's right.
In one sense, a total defeat of Russia in Ukraine would be absolutely disastrous for world peace.
Will America be a stronger country under Trump than it is right now?
I don't know. I don't know. Don't write anyone off. The system works. You know, anyone that tries to pick this is crazy.